Whatcom County voters are facing a number of important issues on the November ballot. These proposals from the Charter Review Commission and from County Council could have a profound impact on the way we vote and the shape of the council we elect. Two important proposals would change the way council members are elected. One, proposed by the Charter Review Commission, would require district-only voting for council members in both the primary and the general election. Another, proposed by County Council, would redraw the electoral map to create 5 electoral districts instead of the current 3. There are other important measures that have been proposed by the Charter Review Commission. One would impose term limits on council members and the county executive, limiting them to 3 terms. Another would require a 7-0 vote by County Council to change an amendment approved by 2/3 of the voters. Still another would require a 7-0 vote by Council to put on the ballot a measure to change election procedures. Now today we have 2 knowledgeable guests to discuss these issues and to talk about why Whatcom voters should say yes or no to these measures. Ken Bell is a member of the Charter Review Commission and a past candidate for Port Commissioner. He is a founder of Best Recycling and a pioneer in the waste management field. Rudd Brown was elected in 2013 as an at-large member of County Council. He was the founder of the RISEX Group, a multinational mobile technology solutions company, and he's the CEO of Rihanna LLC, which focuses on supporting entrepreneurs and innovative business models. So please join me in welcoming our guests. Now, each of our guests will speak. Then after each of our guests speaks, I'll ask some questions, and it's my hope, and also that of our panelists, that we'll have a real discussion and some back and forth here between the guests. And then, as always, we'll take questions from our name tag wearing members. So Mr. Bell is the winner of the Alphabet Derby, so let's hear from him first.
We were a part of the Charter Review Commission, and a part of the reason I wanted to run for this was twofold. I tend to be a very harsh critic of political discourse and the way it's come about. And I see a very polarizing world, and I see political parties and I see political positions become hardened. And the days of getting along, which quite surprisingly you're going to find that Rudd and I do, have long gone, because the idea of debating ideas is long gone. We've taken long and hard and fast positions, and we tend to support a side. And the political parties are a part of that, and don't do much to help alleviate some of the acrimony that comes from that. So from my standpoint, this was one of the reasons. The second thing is, the charter really is something that you only get a chance to review every so often. And so for that purpose, I went into this. And I just wanted to go into a couple of the things that are up there. First of all, the original intent was for ordinary citizens to come and review the charter on a regular basis. And then they were to tweak it. And they were to put into, on a ballot for the public to vote on. And some of the discourse that we've heard, you would think that we were actually imposing some of the proposals that we put forward on the populace, which is not the case. We were here to put ideas forward for the population to vote on, and to let those ideas win or lose based on their own merits. The reason that I put forward some of these positions is not necessarily that I thought they were great ideas, but I thought someone did, and they deserved a fair hearing. I want to go back and talk about home rule charter. We're one of 7 of 39 counties in the state of Washington that has home rule. Of those, there is a real distinction, and the reason that the reason home rule is different from the county commissioner style government is the county commissioners have both a legislative and an executive role in governing. The idea of voting county-wide for someone who has both legislative and executive power in a county is a very valid point. In a home rule charter county, all of these 7, with the exception of one, which is Whatcom County, which still operates at some level under a commissioner-style government, they all have a district-only or a district-elected representative that represents their district to come to the legislative end of the table, because they do elect executives to handle the executive and financial function on their own. That's what separates a home rule from a county commissioner style government. When you look at where we are one of 7. All of the other 6 have some district representation from their districts to the legislative branch, with some kind of manager who is appointed by the council or an elected county executive. Very different from a county commissioner style government where they have both functions. These are some of my favorite quotes, and with all due respect, this speaks to some of the acrimony, and Mr. Douglas, if you're in the room, I thank you for calling me a scheming clown. I also want you to read the second one, which talks about how the Charter Commission spent a lot of time sifting through the ashes to find holes. This is part of the political discourse that I'm really tired of. We didn't sift through ashes to find holes. The idea of a district-only voting had been done before. It's been done in other counties. The third one calls for the end of district-only elections by inane, I can't read it from here and I apologize. You can see we are called old gray white people out in the county. And then the last one is the discussion where progressives said we could all meet with the party leadership on Tuesday to talk about a strategy, or they're going to miss the Tea Party. And it's in a joking fashion, but it shows that this process became political in a hurry. And that's the problem with trying to put a commission together to review the charter, was the parties got involved, the political process got involved, and it wasn't ordinary citizens as our freeholders had imagined that came together to discuss ideas. There were some amazing ideas that came forward in this process, but it became a battle from day one. So the purpose for district only and the 5-district plan, and which one is nefarious? District only has been proposed before. It won once, it lost once. Nothing nefarious, no sifting through ashes to find something that was made out of whole cloth. It was there before. It was not some right-wing creation. It had been tried by others and other charter review commissions that were not dominated by conservatives in the past. And there are other home rule type counties that have this kind of voting. Home rule with district representations is the rule and not the exception. District boundaries were developed in a bipartisan fashion in 2011. They have been tweaked since the county took over home rule. There was a discussion that they might be gerrymandered, but there was a bipartisan commission established, and we'll go through that in just a minute. These districts have never been deemed unfair until now, until the Charter Review Commission came back and said, let's do this, but suddenly they're unfair. If they were truly unfair, why was that not addressed at an earlier point, after 2011? Not one of the people who voted for district only talked about changing the boundaries because of the process that it went through to get the boundaries drawn. The Charter Commission is merely a vessel to place items on the ballot. You would have thought that we were rolling this out and it was going to be the law of the land, but they're on the ballot. You don't like it, vote it down. The simple solution would be an up or down vote on the proposals that we made. Then came the district only and where it got political. And here's one of the commissioners. Aside from my thinking, the 5-2 system is a decent compromise, and I also think it will really complicate the Republicans' effort and increase the odds that people will not vote for the entire lot, which means complicate the ballots so nobody votes for anything. That's what it says. It was thrown together at the last minute, the 5-district proposal, with 3 different revisions that came through. It included the Democratic Party, it included nonprofits, it included strategists, and I will say this on both sides. It became political. These are the 3 districts. The bipartisan committee that put the 3 districts together were 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, and a judge to adjudicate. The 5-district proposal came from a lot of people on the left side of the spectrum without the inclusion of those of us on the right. You'd be amazed at how many of us on the right are reasonable people to talk to. This is a 3-district plan. It was put together by the people you just heard. The only gerrymander that you see, at least it's obvious to me, is in District 2, the yellow. There's a little jut that goes into that red district. That was created in order to make sure that the incumbent port commissioner, Mike McCulley, who somebody might have run against in the past, could have a safe seat. Everything else follows a line and was negotiated by a bipartisan committee. Fairness. The Charter Review Commission has been established and gone through this for a long period of time. This is the first time the legislative branch has intervened, and they intervened by passing their own competing ordinance. We debated on the Charter Review Commission the 5 districts, and there were enough holes in it and enough concerns with it that it failed 4 in favor and 11 opposed. That's hardly a partisan vote on the Charter Review Commission. Hardly. And we debated it. 5 smaller districts, in my mind, is going to further divide us into smaller groups. When we put smaller groups together and we want to isolate people into little categories, what you've just done is you've just put a fence around people of like mind so that they can then rail against people against the other mind. The more we divide ourselves, the less we are going to be civil to each other, and I don't like that. 5 districts creates smaller, more divisive communities. If you want to put a fence around Linden, I think that's wrong. We should be able to debate ideas. The reason the at-large exists for most commissioner districts is that because the government is commissioners, they act as a legislative body. Home rule counties that do have an at-large seat, like Clark County, have an at-large seat because that is the chair of the council, overseeing the entire council. The rest of them are voted by district. We are a home rule county with an elected executive. This is the 5-rule district plan, and when you look at the numbers, there's no reason we don't think it's fair. The idea of fairness is one where both sides look at each other and say, yeah, that's fair, which is what happened in the 3-district plan where both sides came together to develop the 3 districts. This isn't fair. And then there's the trump card. That is the at-large seat. In the at-large seat, you have the city of Bellingham with the majority of the votes in 2 positions, as well as the positions that the city holds. It ensures that there will always be a progressive majority on the council. Like that? That took a while, because I'm not technical. It was hasty and haphazard, the 5-district. It came together, proposed on the 23rd by a citizen operating on behalf of the group, put on the agenda at 3:30 on the day it was put on the consent agenda, which meant that everybody agreed. Then there was a public hearing on the 7th. There was a 3rd version that was finally introduced. I know I'm running short on time, so I'm going to run quick. In order for this to work as advertised, district only must pass. because for the 5-district to work, you've got to have a representative elected out of that district without the influence from an outside party. That's the idea, if the intent is correct. And then what wasn't thought through was, what about the port and the PUD? They follow the county's districts. Those will be impacted by any 5-district measure. And then there's one more thing that wasn't thought through. So when you look at section 4.42, it talks about how these districts are going to be drawn. In that section, by the 16th of May in 2016, all of those districts have to be in place. That leaves the 3rd district without a representative, because Carl Weimer, being in that district, would now be firmly ensconced in 2 and not in his district, number 3, until that district gets elected 20 months later. My way of saying, this could have been done. Time could have been taken to work some of this out, but that was not the case. These are the current 5 districts, and if you look at where 3 is proposed and 4 is proposed and how the populations center out, again, you have District 3 without a representative, because firmly ensconced in number 4 is Carl. We've been told time and time again, and I can't tell you how many times we came to the microphone, people telling us this was about coal. It's not about coal from our side, from my side. Even Barbara Ryan recognized that when she said, in reality, $200 per commissioner from GPT interest is not the real motivation. It's the ability of anybody who owns property to do what they want with it without government interference. That's closer to the mark. But coal was the issue used to divide us. It's not about coal. Then the last one, I'm at a loss to see how this proposal is better than the current situation, at least if our goal is to design a plan whereby the county council can represent the interests of the environment, progressive community. So even the 5-district didn't represent the community she wanted represented. This one you can't see very well, but this is the 2011, and this is to some other issues that I'm going to get to as well. I happen to be a big supporter of term limits. When you look at the amount of money that was raised, the highest amount of money was raised back in 2011 was raised by Tony Larson, who raised just over 50, because I can't see it from here. You look at the 2009, and you look at the highest one, it was Ken Mann. Before last election, these fundraising limits had never gone beyond that $50,000 to $60,000 range. When you come into the last election and you look at who made and where the money went, 25% of the money raised was raised by the at-large position. 25% of all the money raised. We raised $600,000. You look at the red bar to the right, that is double what was raised in any previous election, and it took 3 elections to catch up to that level. The amount of money entering into our political discourse is maddening. This is what I'm fighting to stop. You look at who won and how much more they raised, and what you see is that all of those in the pink were not from the right. All of the money went somewhere else. And you look at the people on the right, they raised at or less than they raised in previous elections. The idea that coal money was funding this really is untrue. I'm against the money. Term limits is my last one. Isn't 12 years long enough? Elected and appointed officials should strive to become public servants, take office with their neighbors, and live by the laws that they have to implement. 5-district proposal is conceived and unnecessary. Anyway, you can read the rest of that. Term limits is necessary, I think, in order to help take some of the money out. I'd like to see one term where you're not running for re-election, right?
Thank you.
So we're just waiting for my PowerPoint to come up. And while we're doing that, I just want to point out that with Ken and I, we've known each other for a couple of years now. And most of our debates are, we sit on opposite sides of the line. I would describe them as passionate and respectful. However, there will be a price to pay for the Trump card. You're paying for lunch next time. Okay, so
You did catch it.
of course I caught it. By the way, my hair is real, by the way. So I want to just start off by giving a little bit of history about the charter review proposal. The main one that's on the ballot this year is the proposal to change this to a district-only voting system. And this proposal was on the ballot in 2005, and in 2005 there was no voter's guide. So it appeared on the ballot with very little associated information. Most voters didn't have any input on, or didn't have any real information on it. The problem with this was that the problem with this is that district-only voting creates safe districts. And once elected to a safe district, an incumbent often becomes effectively immune from challenge from either party. If it's a safe district, there's not enough votes to secure competition from the opposing party, and you usually, the party rules for both parties is you don't challenge a sitting incumbent who's been elected. So you get what's called congressional stagnation. Now, we elect a Congress on a district-only basis, and well, that works pretty well, does it? Oh, maybe not. To me, a good government is one that is easily accountable to the people, and a county-wide voting maximises accountability. District-only voting reduces it. So in 2008, after the population here had tried district-only voting for a couple of years, the citizens asked the council to put this topic back on the ballot. And by the way, in 2008, there was a voter's guide which had pro and con statements as to why you should do this. 54% of citizens voted to repeal district-only voting. Informed citizens. But why? So the second question now is, why 5 districts? Well, state law says that districts shall be as equal in population as possible. Now, we have that with the existing system. As compact as possible? Not really. As geographically contiguous areas, may not favour or disfavour any racial group or political party, shall coincide with natural boundaries to the extent possible, and shall preserve communities of interest. Look at our existing map. It doesn't really meet any of those objectives except the population distribution. 5 districts is first and foremost, because we have a diverse community in Whatcom County, it's much easier to achieve the goals outlined in the state law if you have 5 districts. You have 5 districts to work with, as opposed to 3 districts to work with. And remember, the ballot amendment proposal only asks the voters if they want the 5 districts versus 3. The actual location and the boundaries of those districts will be determined by a bipartisan, independent districting committee that will be appointed if the ballot measure passes. So I'll put up here a table. Now, the challenge, the challenge I've heard with people saying is, well, if we have 5 districts versus 3, and we have county-wide versus district-only, and you combine those 2 together, what could happen? Well, this is the way it could look like. The top line, the one I've highlighted in purple, is what we currently have. We have county-wide voting with 3 districts. It's pretty good for reasons I'll explain in a minute. I think 3 districts with district-only voting is the worst of the alternatives that we could end up with at the end of the election. I think, frankly, the best alternative is county-wide voting with 5 districts, and district-only voting with 5 districts is, I don't think it's a good reason. I don't think it's a good alternative for the reasons we'll talk about in a minute. Propositions 2 and 3. Now, the intent of those who promoted the district-only voting was twofold. They wanted to get district-only voting back on there, and then they wanted to lock it in forever. And Propositions 2 and 3 are designed to strip the county council from ever being able to propose a return to county-wide voting to the ballot proposition if people choose to put it on the ballot to go to district-only voting, And then after a couple of years, they again say, oh, this is not a good idea. Please, council, would you put it back on the ballot? The idea here is to prevent the council from doing that. Now, I'll just pause here for a minute. There are 3 ways under the county charter that you can put a ballot proposition on. The first way is the Charter Review Commission, which meets every 10 years. The second way is the council, through a supermajority vote, can decide to put something on the ballot, or the citizens can do it, and I can't remember, through initiative or a referendum. So there's 3 legitimate paths to put stuff on the ballot. The Charter Review Commission is obviously a legitimate path, and so is the County Council. The other reason I don't like Proposition 2 and 3 is they're misleading titles. They say limiting the power of the council to amend the charter. The council cannot amend the charter this way. The council does not have that power. All the council can do is put something on the ballot and ask the voters what they want to do. So does this debate mean about district-only voting? Does that mean the county-wide voting system is unfair? Well, let's find an impartial test. What happens when you have the flexibility, you have the ability to respond, and yet the voters have the ability to be fickle? Well, over the last 16 years, and remember in the 16 years we had county-wide voting, then we had district-only voting, and then we had county-wide voting again. Over those last 16 years, the proof of the fairness to me is what's happened in terms of who's been elected at the at-large position, because it's the one position throughout that 16 years that has remained accountable to all the voters. Well, in 2001, you got a Conservative Marlene Dawson. In 2005, you got a progressive Seth Fleetwood. In 2009, you got a Conservative Bill Knutson. In 2013, you got what many people would describe as a progressive, myself, although I personally would describe myself as more of a centrist. County-wide voting works. It holds county council members accountable to the voters. And this is proof that the system works the way it's supposed to. Term limits, and with all due respect to my friend here, Ken, who was the sponsor of this, I see this as a solution looking for a problem. And by the way, Ken and I had a very spirited debate on this, and to Ken's credit, right in the middle of the meeting, I made a couple of points and he changed his position, and I respect that. Not on the whole thing. That was regarding the sheriff and the order, if I remember correctly. There are 2 parts to this, council member term limits and the executive term limits. And by the way, Ken and I had probably the most vigorous debate on the executive side. The council member term limits. Now remember, council members are part-time citizen servants. It takes a while to learn the job properly and establish broad connections, partly because it's a complex job and partly because it's a part-time job. Historically, there's been a lot of natural turnover within the county council. Exceptions are Sam Crawford, who was on the council for 15 plus years, and Barbara Brenner, who's been on for about 20 plus years. It won't affect most council members because most council members, for whatever, by their own choice or the choice of the voters, don't last the 12 years that Ken has proposed as a limit. But it may cost us really good ones that want to continue to serve, and the voters want to continue to have an office. And again, with the executive, I think if the executive is a very different position, and it's like the sheriff and the order, where Ken and I also disagreed. The executive is a full-time professional career position. It's the same job as a CEO of a large corporation. The county's 800 plus employees, a budget just something south of $200 million. It's not an amateur's job. It's a job where you want a professional CEO in that position. It takes a while to learn the job and to establish the necessary relationships with the people you have to work with. And historically, there's also not been a lot of turnover, which is good, by the way, in any organisation. If you've got a good CEO in the position, you don't want to be changing them out. And my real concern with this is this: if it's passed, is this one will negatively impact the quality of people willing to serve. Why? Because good candidates will not consider this as a viable career path if they know that they're going to get fired in their 50s. You know, they start when they're 40, let's say, and mid-50s you're told, oh, sorry, you're out of a job. And, you know, I'm in my mid-50s, and I know a lot of people who don't really want to be forced to change careers in their mid-50s. So what would a person like that do? Well, the good ones, if they really want that sort of career, frankly, they'll go somewhere else. We will get the second choice candidates for that job. Also, an executive's last term will be a lame duck. In the last term of office, the staff, frankly, the staff don't like what the executive wants to do, they'll just wait him out. The supermajority position, now the proposition, and this is one that the council also sponsored along with the 5 districts. Understand that the county charter is like our constitution. A supermajority is a term that means you need 2/3 of the votes which is chosen so that you try to the best of your ability to ensure a bipartisan support for major changes. So supermajority is required for the US Congress to change the US Constitution. Supermajority is required by the state legislature to change the state constitution. A supermajority is required by the county council to propose that the voters make changes to this county charter, but it's not required by the Charter Review Commission, which currently only requires a simple majority, 8 of 15. The council's supermajority ballot proposition asks voters if future Charter Review Commissions should also be subject to the same supermajority rules as US Congress, the state legislature, and the county council. It would require the County Review Commission to seek better bipartisan support by requiring a supermajority vote on stuff that gets put in front of the voters, which is, by the way, it's only 10 of the 15, it's 2 more votes, instead of the simple majority, which again, as I said, was 8 of 15. I believe it would encourage the commissioners to work together to produce better proposals to put in front of the voters. Now, I can't finish this presentation without giving you a little bit of a view as to what some of the other proposals that came forward. Now, to be fair to Ken, I don't think you were the sponsor of any of these ones. But the first one was the Charter Review Commission tried to prohibit the council from ever proposing amendments that the current Charter Commission didn't like. Right? It was deemed to be unconstitutional. So then they compromised and they ended up with the 7-0 vote, which I don't think is, there's a question about whether that's constitutional, but it at least got past the first smell test. The next one was they tried to prohibit any citizen living in one of our cities from serving in the at-large position. Gee whiz, I thought the cities paid 55% of the taxes. Anyway. That was also deemed to be unconstitutional. Then they tried to prohibit grants of county funds to non-profit organisations. Every one of them. Now, this to me, I apologise for going a little bit farther on the emotional side, but I thought this was pretty mean-spirited because the purpose of this was to punish one non-profit in particular, and the intent was they were willing to throw every non-profit under the bus in order to punish one of them. It had a huge public backlash and it was withdrawn. And then finally they tried to force the non-profits to turn over all their financial records or all lose funding, and this also achieved the same result. This election to me, and this is why I'm so passionate about it and became increasingly more involved as things have gone on, this election will decide who is accountable to whom. I love democracy. I would give my life for democracy. It is one of the greatest gifts we've ever had. And the key part to that is the citizens have to retain the ability to make their electeds accountable to them. In the current system, when you have county-wide voting, all 7 county council members are accountable to you. With district-only voting, only a minority, 3 of the 7, will be accountable to you. And this is the thing maybe Ken and I agree on, at least, maybe not on the podium, but maybe elsewhere. If the majority of the council is not accountable to individual citizens, then the control of the county will be given to those with the most money to influence the elections. Thank you. So my recommendations are simple. Vote no on 1, district-only voting. Vote no on 2, limiting the power of the council. Vote no on 3, which is, as I said, is almost the same thing. And vote no on term limits. Vote yes on 5 districts. And vote yes on requiring a supermajority for both the County Council and the Charter Review Commission. Thank you very much.
So thanks to both of you. I think it's an indication of the information that you've brought that many of the questions that I had have been answered here. But I do have a couple. Rudd, there's been a lot of talk about how the current district system tends to disempower people who do not live in Bellingham. Why should a Linden area resident who feels disempowered by the current district system vote for the 5-district plan?
Well, actually, unfortunately, I don't have Ken's slide, but Ken's slide showed that one of the proposals, and remember, they're only proposals, that was used to inform voters as to what, inform citizens as to what the 5-district proposal, how it would impact things, was a map that those proponents drew up, and it showed drawing, hoping that the district the redistricting commission would look at a map that included, say, Linden and the farming areas together, that would include areas like Maple Falls and Deming and the eastern side of Sudden Valley together, that would include sections of Bellingham together, so that you'd end up with, consistent with the state law, you'd end up with communities of interest being in the same district.
And Ken, why should a Bellingham resident who finds herself in the same district with a Sumas resident support district-only voting?
So I need to respond to one thing that he said, first of all, and that is the idea that you would isolate like people into those districts. And when you think about the votes that will be occurring, the reason we are here today is because there are people in the county who feel very disenfranchised. Sitting in this room, you may not feel it, but you walk out into the county, we felt it. There are people who currently feel disenfranchised by the current system. It's real, and they're not stupid people. They are people who really do feel like their votes don't matter or their lives don't matter at some level. And so they become disengaged and they become more angry. We become those angry white guys that Mayor Douglas discussed. But that is the opposite of where we should be going. The more we isolate people into smaller communities, and especially if you're going to give the city of Bellingham the ability to override those jurisdictions, you're going to find more frustration in the county. You may have people who are there, but they're constantly overridden, and they're constantly voted out, and they're never listened to. The idea is to put together a plan that puts ideas first and not interest groups first. The idea is to put population centers together where you encourage a debate and not isolate like-minded people into little categories so that one category can overpower another one. That is never the intent of a true democracy or a true government. The idea is to make those people feel enfranchised and to feel valued and to have their ideas heard. By that same token, the amount of resources that are going into these elections has changed the dynamic. Granted, we go back to 2001 with a turnover, but it is unprecedented the amount of money going into politics in this day and age. It has completely turned this paradigm on its head. Did I answer your question? I didn't hear your question.
I think so. Let's talk about term limits again for a minute, because I think this is an important, really important part of this. And both of you discussed it. And the proponents of term limits will say that they bring about fresh thinking and new blood, new ideas. And those who oppose them say that the limits can get rid of institutional memory in an elected body at just the point it needs it most. So what's more important for Whatcom County now? Do we need those fresh ideas and those fresh people, or do we need the institutional memory? Can we have both with term limits?
Well, I think the key thing to understand is if you don't have congressional stagnation, if you don't create, frankly, a district-only voting system where people get locked in, they get elected to office, and then they stay in office because they don't get attacked from either side, then you effectively need term limits because it's the only way to get them out. But if you have a dynamic system where the people can get voted out frequently, I mean, we have term limits at the moment. We have effective term limits at the moment. They're called, I don't like what you did, I'm voting against you in the next election. But that only works if you've got a dynamic process. That only works, frankly, I think, if you've got county-wide voting. Why? Because county-wide voting is as close to voting from the centre as possible. And it's the reality is that most elections, in a true democracy, most elections are decided by a couple of point spread either side.
Ken?
And I say more so with the 5-district plan will you need term limits, because you will find more isolated communities that are more like-minded, and they're more likely to find someone that they want to keep in because they think right, they're steady, they're constant. The turnover is absolutely necessary. Just for purposes of clarification, when I first proposed term limits, it was not 12 years. That was a compromise made with the rest of the commission. I really wanted 8 years because I do view the legislative branch as being a public service. And I do view the legislative branch as being citizens coming in and living with the laws that they create. Where we did agree was on the executive at some level. It does take a level of professionalism. The reason that I brought the executive back into the fold was because I did think there was a balance that was, it would have been out of balance to have term limits on the council and not on the executive. And it would have given the executive branch a lot more power than the legislative branch. But it's for you to decide. The proposals are on the table, not for us to impose on you, but for you to decide what is the best answer. Under the 5-district plan, smaller communities, more like-minded, more likely to become entrenched with a single person over time, and therefore in need of term limits, probably more so than a 3-district, but also, in my mind, necessary in a 3-district. And you mentioned 2 people who'd been there who needed it, and I'm telling you, I think they both needed it after being there for longer than 12 years.
So we saw Rudd's chart where he sort of ranks the possible outcomes. Ken, if both district-only voting initiative passes and the 5-district plan passes, are you going to be happy?
If only district only
If
and 5?
district-only voting passes and the 5-district plan passes.
I'm never happy. You know, I hadn't thought that through. At this point, it will be what we decide as a community. The fact that we are out there debating this is a healthy thing, and we will live with what we have.
So, Rudd, what is the most important reason, in your view, for the 5-district plan?
Well, I think it's more consistent with the intent of state law, and it's not just this is not just a statement of saying, well, just automatically comply with somebody else's idea. I think it's actually the intent of the state law. If you read the background to it, is actually pretty good. Sort of back to you, if I can answer Ken's question, the question you posed to Ken. If you look on the chart that I put back up on the screen, one of the things, again, my preferred outcome is, in order, is county-wide voting, 5 districts. My second preferred is county-wide voting, 3 districts. If we have if we have district-only voting in 5 districts, we still retain 2 of those positions at large, which is a bit better than, I mean, it's better for me, as I understand democracy. It's better for us to have 2 at-large positions, you know, as opposed to 1 at-large if we just go to district-only voting.
Of course you do.
Well, if I can just respond to that one, I just want to point out, through all the Charter Review Commission proposals, everything that's on the ballot, my position is the one that's completely unaffected by anything. So.
Okay, I think it's time to open up questions from the floor here.
I do have one thing that we discussed at the charter that I really wanted to bring on the table, and I defer to my friend Stoney on this. Really, one of the things that we discussed was the power of the parties and the political influence that went on both sides. I think you'll agree that there was a lot of party activism on your side, and there was some on mine. But when you look at a proposal that was brought together, which is proportional representation, and I'm sure you're going to say something about it. It literally turns the parties on its head.
So before we start here, just a word to everyone that this is a question period, so I would ask that you put your questions in the form of a question, and let's keep our speeches to a minimum so that we can get as many questions in as possible. And just look for our roving microphone wielders.
I will put it in the form of a question if you require that, although Ken did put a question to me. So should I answer Ken's question? Okay.
The noes have it.
Okay, well, I'll ask the question back then, and with a little bit of a prelude, namely, that in the Charter Review Commission, the possibility of having proportional representation as a ballot measure came within one vote of passing. It was 7-6 in favor. You had to get 8 votes for something to get on the ballot. And the question is, why would proportional representation be better than any of the proposals before the voters, and better than the current system, when all of those systems are winner-take-all systems?
The quick answer to that is it does allow different ideas and different rankings of votes to come through. So the idea, it's a very complex one, which is probably why it didn't get passed, is that you rank your candidates by 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if your candidate isn't number 1, you don't necessarily lose that election because somebody else drops off and those votes get reallocated to somebody up above. So it allows you to vote for the person that you like in the order that you like them, and not just who the party selects for you. And it really does turn the party system on its head, and it was advantageous to that respect.
So I'm actually quite interested in the proportional representation idea, and I think there's a couple of reasons that it does deserve some consideration. One is, in the proportional system, you might have 10 candidates running against each other. Those 10 one may get 20%, one may get 15, et cetera, et cetera. It will make the debate less nasty, frankly, because at the end of the day, to get elected, if you're in one of, let's say he's 20%, I'm 15%, and there's a smattering of percentages over here with different candidates, it discourages either of us from being nasty to anybody else. Why? Because at the end of the election, or the end of the first round, we need the support of the ones that didn't make that line. So you frankly just create a better dialogue. The other reason I think it deserves some consideration is if you look at some of the presidential elections in the last 2 decades, Ross Perot cost, if you're a Republican, it was pretty frustrating to see Ross Perot cost George Bush Sr., if I remember correctly, the election because he peeled off votes from the right. And if you're a Democrat, it was pretty frustrating to see Ralph Nader cost Al Gore the election because he peeled off votes to the left. In a preferential voting system, both Ross Perot and Nader would have lost that round, and then they had the opportunity of which of the other candidates they wanted to suggest that their votes go to. And so the end result would have been whoever the majority supported at the time would have been reflected in the ultimate outcome.
Other questions?
I like the way things were before this process started. Oh, it's on. Oh, just hold it closer. Got it. Okay. What about the strategy of voting no for all proposals? Would that?
If you like the way it was before, that's exactly what you would do.
Can you estimate the effect on the general election of people taking that position?
Nothing would change.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I can't imagine that many people yet think the way I do, that we should vote no on everything. It's all vote yes on this or vote yes on those as alternatives. The third alternative is to vote no on all of them. Okay.
Well, you could vote no on all of them, and the other alternative is you could vote yes on all of them. I mean, or any combination of the above. But Ken is right in that if it's a no vote for everything, then after the election, things are exactly the same as the day before the election.
Okay, question over here.
Yeah, this question is for Councilmember Brown, and I completely support the council's ordinance for the supermajority for the Charter Review Commission, where it requires supermajority for them to change what essentially is the Constitution. But I'm just wondering, you support that, but when the Charter Review Commission was evaluating the 5-district proposal, that failed with a supermajority of 11-4, which was bipartisan support, and they essentially debated that for quite some time. So I guess I'm just wondering if a bipartisan group of progressives and conservatives, and I believe the count was 8 conservatives to 7 progressives on the 15-member Charter Review Commission, but they seemed to put a lot of time and effort and discussion into that. What compelled the county council to believe that the Charter Review Commission on a bipartisan basis was so wrong that you felt like it needed to be put on the ballot?
So thank you for the question, former council member Larson. The reason was quite simple. We started getting a lot of people saying that they felt that the Charter Review Commission was not adequately listening to their point of view on that point. And at the public hearing, we had probably close to 100 people testify. 2/3 of those, I kept a running count, 2/3 of those were in favour of the 5-district proposal, and then we were presented with a petition with 2,100 signatures asking for it to be put on the ballot. So in my opinion, I think that was a reflection that the Charter Review Commission probably could have done a better job at outreach and understanding how much people really wanted that to be on the ballot.
Question from this side?
I think I'm going to speak to that just a little bit. Because we did. The 5-district proposal came before the charter, and it was voted down 11-4, and that was not strictly on a partisan basis. But we were involved in this discussion for months, and we heard public testimony for months. And we sat through meetings where we were called names, and our motives were impugned. And at some level, you stop listening. And I do really want to tell you that that's what's wrong with our political discourse, is as soon as we start calling each other names and trying to, we have more in common than we have apart. I have more in common with Stoney, who is completely on the opposite end of my political spectrum, than I do apart from him. But our discourse has gotten so ugly. And when you hear yourself being called stupid or being bought off, which none of us, me in particular, was not, it really does make you at some point say, why do I want to hear your perspective if you're just going to fire darts at me? I would love to sit down and listen. But I am not stupid, Mr. Douglas. And I am not a white racist, but these are the things that were printed. And I would love to hear your side. And we have had many debates where we can sit down and discuss that without impugning each other's character. And I would love for this process to result in that. And that's the reason that I move forward the things on the charter that I move forward.
And if I can just add to that, I on this area, I completely agree with Ken. On this area, I completely agree with Ken. I don't like the disrespect. And I think the fundamental problem with when it becomes a personal attack and a disrespectful to the, first off, the worst thing is disrespectful to the institution, because that's what we've got. You may not like it, but it's what we've got. And it's the best we've been able to come up with so far. But when you're disrespectful to the person, the first thing that happens is the dialogue stops. Once it's a personal attack, you have a personal defense, and the debate stops, and that's just fundamentally wrong.
Correct.
Tim Douglas, I just wanted to say you've mentioned a couple of things, Ken, Neither of those are quotes from me. I have never said either of those things. So I'm not really sure from what you're quoting that is attributed to me personally. I've never called you a clown.
I pulled those out of the Cascadia Weekly, and you were attributed to the article. So I apologize if that was not you.
Yeah,
But whoever
those
wrote
would
the
not-
article did.
Those were not quoting me.
I apologize.
Thank you.
But if you read the article, they really did take personal attacks. And you have my apology.
Question for Council Member Brown. You made a very convincing case for the benefits of at-large voting, so why have 5 districts at all?
What are you suggesting as opposed to having one district? Well, I think one of the useful things about the districting process is that, remember, under the current system, on the primary election, you only can select a candidate from within your own district. So the idea is that the candidate comes from an area that's of common interest or a common community. It's at the general election that everybody votes. I think the idea of having a requirement that at the primary, the two people who emerge at the end of the primary are as close as possible to someone who lives in that particular area that they're going to represent. I actually think that's a good idea. I'm supportive of district-only voting at the primary level, at the primary election, but not at the general election.
First of all, I'm really sorry, Mr. Douglas. I'm really sorry. And I'm disturbed by what I've said, so I apologize. To your point, you go to Linden and ask that question. You go to Everson and ask that question and say, why not? You've made a compelling argument for district only, and you're going to find a bunch of people who are disaffected, and they don't feel the way you feel about the county having control, because they don't feel they have a voice.
Okay, I think we have time for one more, if we have one more.
On? Okay. I would like to thank both of you for taking on very emotional issues and still remaining friends. And the other thing, I think part of the problem, and it's a national problem, is money. And the Supreme Court ruled that money is free speech. And somehow we're going to have to whip that on the little local levels and on the national level.
Thank you for your question.
Yep. Okay, one more. Okay.
Just before you do that, I just want to see if I can answer. I don't want to throw something in that I think is relevant on the money issue, is that Seattle has just moved to a district-only voting system. Well, they moved to it a couple of years ago, and this is the first election that is district-only voting. One of the reasons given for why they should do district-only voting is because it's too expensive and it's too much work to have to canvass the whole area that you're in. And on the first point, I have to say I'm sorry if it's too much work to talk to all the voters, and maybe this is the wrong job for you. The second thing is that the statistics come out from, there's a Seattle Times report that said that this year, which is again the first year of district-only voting in Seattle, has seen more money come into the total election process than they've seen in the last 11 years. This is not a fix for money. This will make the money flow even worse.
Okay, I have a way out question. Has anyone ever given any consideration to the fact that maybe geography in a place like where you live isn't the solution to representation in Whatcom County? Perhaps we should follow the very dysfunctional WIRA system where we go by caucuses. So what we're really talking about is Bellingham, downtown communities, we're talking about ag communities, we're talking about tribal communities, we're talking about people interested in water, we're talking about people interested in all the different issues. Has anyone given any thought to that?
Not me.
Well, the US Constitution is pretty specific, is one person, one vote. So.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. One more question.
You said that 3 questions ago.
I just have a question for Ken. Ken, the theoretical things and practical things are different. I had an experience, I got nominated to the council just a few months back, but I've been repeatedly told that we have no representation on the council. I have lived in the district for 30 years. I have worked with farmers. I carry a lot of values from that part of the county. People believe
What's
they
your
represent. Yes, yes.
You have a question?
Yes. When you say that there are people out there, they feel they're not represented, it's exactly their feeling. It's not that they're not represented. They feel
And
that
your
way.
question,
You
please.
can't change it.
Okay, I don't know that I heard a question there.
Maybe I could respond to this, is that I think it doesn't matter which side you're on. There are going to be occasions where you don't feel that you're represented. And that's just a fundamental problem of democracy. I mean, one of the things is you elect a representative. You can be a very passionate supporter of a representative on either side of the aisle. And then what happens is the person gets elected, and then you say, well, they're going to vote exactly the way I want, aren't they? Oh, they didn't vote exactly the way I want. That person doesn't represent me. At the end of the day, we're all individuals. You're not, the only way you're going to elect the person who's going to vote exactly the way you want is if you've got a twin.
The real issue for us is not necessarily whether or not you have a representative, it's whether or not you feel heard. And I think that what you're getting a sense of in the county is that there are people out there who don't think they're being heard. They may very well have you as a representative, but there's a large number of people who don't feel like they're being heard, and I think that's really...
Talk to me once in the last 5 months, not even once,
not
one phone call.
Okay, I think we're going to have to wrap up. First of all, I'd like to thank our guests for coming here. I think you have certainly generated more light than heat today, which is very much appreciated. And I think the civility that you've shown to each other and the level of discourse that we have here should be an example to politicians throughout the country. So, as a token of our appreciation, each of you will get a copy of The Salish Sea, Jewel of the Pacific Northwest. Thanks again. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you very much.